it's time to dole out some mighty judgments and buckets of mortal wounds with 6 scary rules combos from the new Votann Codex. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where recently we've been analysing the new Leagues of Votann Codex, and today I thought we'd bring a few of these scary rules in the book together in some devastating unit combos. I feel like perhaps out of any of the armies in 40k, the Leagues of Votann are going to be good for just spiking damage output towards the sky. They might be somewhat slow and a bit short-ranged, but depending on which league that you go for and what units you choose, they do have rather a lot of options for just blasting their opponents off the board with buckets of mortal wounds, or shed loads of regular damage that doesn't need to wound in the first place. I'm sure there'll be plenty more interesting stuff from the book, but here are just a few interesting combos that stood out to me, at least a few of which I'm sure will be used in competitive lists. So first up, let's talk Exo Armour with a big mortal wound damage output from the Einhyr Hearthguard. These very chunkily armoured Votann Terminators are 350 points for a squad of 10, and while their melee damage is okay, it seems like they're a lot more stacked towards actual ranged firepower than more classic Terminators, either having a plasma weapon or a Vulcanite Disintegrator backed up by a shoulder-mounted grenade launcher. The Vulcanite Disintegrator I think is particularly interesting. 3 shots at 18-inch range at strength 5 AP 0 damage 1, but interestingly hit rolls of a 6 cause a mortal wound and the attack sequence to end. Usually for most Vulcanite weapons that tends to come on the wound roll, and having it on the hit roll means that the guns are going to be belting out quite a few mortal wounds. The grenade launchers certainly double down with a fair amount of volume anti-infantry fire though, d6 shots at the same range at strength 4 and AP -1. An average of 6 or 7 shots per guy isn't too bad. So that gives us a bulky infantry unit with some close range volume fire. Usually they really struggle to get that in range, but if you give them a teleport crest, then for 2 CP you can jump them across the board, potentially right from turn 1 for a meaty alpha strike. Ideally, if you could have them next to a Brokhyr Forge Master, then he reduces the cost of war gear stratagems, so that could allow you to do it for 1 CP, and is yet another good reason to take one of them. It's really quite nice to have a threatening unit jump into somewhere relevant. They could first turn deep strike somewhere 9 inches from the enemy, maybe on an objective, but hopefully within 18 inches of something that they want to rain down hellfire on. Then before they go, give them 4 rerolls to hit somehow. There's a couple of different good options in the Codex, either juice them up with a high Carl's rerolls in the command phase, or if you can land a judgment token on the target that you need, then you can also have 4 rerolls to hit for 1 CP. 4 rerolls to hit alongside judgment tokens do seem to be the absolute best value out of the Votann Codex. I feel like that 1 command point reroll all hits against a judgment token unit is going to get played an awful lot, and is a good reason for including something like a Grimnir to farm up more CP. What's so strong about this is that just purely with the Vulcanite shots, you're averaging a crazy amount of mortal wounds. The full hit rerolls don't just allow you to reroll missed hits, you can also reroll anything else and just fish for those mortal wound 6s. So 30 shots with 4 rerolls should average you 9 mortal wounds against any target at range, straight up killing something like a Space Marine Dreadnought, taking out 3 Terminators, and 9 1-wound infantry models. It's backed up by an awful lot of volume fire of course, another 31 hits at strength 4 AP -1, and another 12 hits at strength 5 AP 0. It's just scarily general purpose, and the combined effect averages you something like 8 or 9 dead Space Marines out of cover, 4 or 5 dead 2+ save Terminators. This doesn't care too much about transhuman physiology or -1 damage, so Death Guard and Deathwing Terminators are both going to get hit hard by this, or even against hard targets it's pretty nasty. 15 wounds against a toughness 7 vehicle for example. I think that's honestly enough to make them worth it, but then you also get at least a reasonable chance at a charge. With a 9-inch charge plus a CP reroll, that's around about a 50% chance of making it in. Certainly not going to happen all the time, but when it does, that's going to be something like an extra 20 odd concussion gauntlet attacks or 30 odd plasma blades. Pretty brutal stuff, and seems like a good distraction unit to throw at the enemy, kill something important, and then have them chewing on them while the rest of your army does its thing. Next up, for just one example of using judgment tokens to big effect, I did think that the Sagitaur fast attack choices seemed like a really good choice for just stacking mass damage on one focused target, just due to how long ranged and fast they are. Sagitaurs move 12 inches and can have 36-inch ranged guns. That means that you could have a bunch of them lurking in your deployment zone and have them just nose into range of one target that you've piled a bunch of judgment tokens on and just make it go away with extreme prejudice. Great Etherean League are looking like a very popular one for mass judgment tokens. If they can get 2 judgment tokens on one unit, then their units will count it as 3, auto wounding on 4s to hit. And it's very simple to get 2 judgment tokens on a unit. You can use a Carl and their 1 CP stratagem, or use the searchlights from a Hearthkyn Pioneer. If you did want to run a bunch of Sagitaurs, maybe you could take the bolt cannon and Sagitaur missile launcher loadout for 120 points. That's 6 shots at strength 6, AP 2, damage 2, plus a couple of shots at strength 10, AP 3, damage 3. I think the other shooting options are very interesting as well, but this one seems to be the good long range one. Say for example, if you took a quarter of your army and Sagitaurs, 480 points for 4 of them, and then you zoom them all to nose just into 36-inch range of something advancing up the board that you stack those judgment tokens on, that would average you 13 to 15 wounds at AP -2, damage 2, plus 6 more wounds at AP -3, damage 3. The latter part is accounting for the Therian League's rerolls to hit. It makes sense to reroll to hit if you are going to be auto-wounding on a 4+ with a big damage 3 attack. I feel like this gives you a pretty threatening point and delete tool just to hoover away one threat that's slogging up the board. Again, pretty massive damage output, 11 dead Space Marines, 5 dead Terminators, or 31 wounds to an Imperial Knight. That really is pretty mad damage output for 500 points of models that are quite fast at 36 inches, plus a character and a CP. Perhaps one of the reasons why Knights in general I think are absolutely going to hate fighting the Leagues of Votann. Again, auto-wounding is pretty powerful. This largely doesn't care about transhuman type rules either. And you don't necessarily have to go down this strategy if there isn't a unit that's worth focusing, otherwise you can just have lots of fast skirmishing vehicles with heavy firepower. You could easily supplement all these guns with a couple of land fortresses perhaps. They work very well in the Greater Therian League as we'll mention, though I do wonder if mass Sagitaurs might still be better with Urani Surtur regulars, as they get toughness 8 and make them really quite hardy to remove. Next up, let's talk about the Brokhyr Forge Master, who I honestly think might be one of the most ridiculously valuable units for the points cost for all the crazy things that he does. We'll mention him with land fortresses in a second, but he can do things like repairs, make a vehicle hit better, discount war gear stratagems and prevent failed saves. But you can go down a different route with him and turn him into a bit of a counterpunch mortal wound damage machine, who can theoretically slug out an average of 9 mortal wounds with that grav rifle of his. At base, the Graviton rifle isn't all that exciting. 3 shots at 18-inch range, strength 5, AP 3 and damage 2. It has the fairly generic grav rule of getting an extra pip of damage versus 3+ save targets or better, and the Brokhyr has a good ballistic skill too, hitting on a 2+. Then upgrade him to a Forge Master for an extra 25 points, so taking him to 105 points, where he gains the interesting rule that if you shoot a Judgment Token marked unit, then a wound roll of 6 will deal mortal wounds instead of the normal damage. It's pretty crazy combined with Judgment Tokens in the first place, as whenever you get an auto wound through them, that counts as an automatic 6 to wound, and that will trigger the mortal wounds. Then if we just wanted to tune up that grav weapon to the absolute ridiculous max, we could take the Warlord trait of the very strong looking Einhyr Conglomerates for a +1 damage to all weapons, and that league also buys them an extra 4-inch range as well, so it's a 22-inch range which does help out. Then we could combine that with Vollum's Master Artifice, turning the grav gun into a beam weapon as well, giving him the chance to hit multiple things along the path of the weapon. Then when he wants to turn on the mortal wound potential, it's 1 CP to make one of your characters absolutely hate a unit. They count as 3 judgment tokens against it for the rest of the game, though occasionally you might just be able to stack them normally with things like Carls and maybe Pioneer Searchlights. Finally, for the last thing in the combo, again 4 rerolls to hit will be great. You can get that either from a high Carl or a 1 CP judgment token stratagem. Obviously there will be a bit of picking and choosing as to which units you amp up. I think turning on this level of damage output though could easily be very worth it against something like say a 3+ save target like an Imperial Knight. That grav gun will now be damage 4, and rerolling all hits gives you a very high chance to auto wound with it. It averages you 9 mortal wounds just with average rolls, and on top of that it is also a beam weapon as well, so if you can target something that skewers multiple units, it means that you can get damage on other units along the beam's path as well. So yet more potential for big damage there. I must admit from the beam rules I think it is a little bit ambiguous as to whether or not that could trigger the mortal wounds or not. If so, then this could be truly ridiculous, but if not, still that's a whole ton of mortal wounds against one target and potentially some regular damage against the rest. It's not even all that much worse against things with bad saves. Against targets with a save worse than a 3+, that's still 7 mortal wounds on average, And what's more, he could even follow this up in melee as well with the same judgment token buff on the hammer. This does potentially have the exact same damage output in combat just as much as it does at range. If you can spare the CP, in theory that could be 18 mortal wounds on a single unit in a turn if the enemy is foolish enough to put them in range of this guy's counterattack. It really is pretty mad. He is a little bit slow and the range is a tiny bit limited, so it's perhaps a little bit more of a counterpunch option like a lot of Votann things, but in general this guy's going to be pretty happy sitting behind things like land fortresses, so providing them a very scary layer of defense seems pretty brutal to me. I would bear in mind the different warlord trait options as well. It might just be best to go for the Forge Master's one to negate damage and get the bonus to vehicle repairs. That would cut the damage output a little bit over the Ymir's warlord trait, though I guess it will be a bit more generalisable to other leagues. And there is an interesting one for ignore light cover and allowing to ignore lookout sir, which could turn that dangerous grav gun into a bit of a sniper as well. Overall though, if you did just go down max damage with this guy, then he does seem pretty insane for the value, combined with all the vehicle support goodness that he gets as well. Next up, I thought it could be interesting to see just how tough a unit of Hearthkyn Warriors could get. In general, the Leagues of Votann seem to be an army that's going to get hit first, but then will try and survive and hit back even harder. So a solid anvil of Hearthkyn Warriors buffed up by characters seems like a pretty reasonable choice for slogging up the board. At base, I think their defense is kind of so-so, 11 points for a toughness 4 model with a 4+ save, and void armor giving them armor of contempt plus turning off certain rerolls. They're not terrible against AP -1, but AP 0 things might wreck them a lot easier than you might expect. If we took these guys in the Irani Surta regulates, the one that gives you the +1 toughness, that gets them to toughness 5 straight off, which immediately makes them a far more chunky and intimidating prospect to remove. Then if you manage to keep your Carl nearby to them, they can get a 5+ invul save from the Rampart crest, so high AP weapons cease to be all that great at removing them. If you have a Grimnir nearby, farming up some command points, he could also throw Fortify on them, +1 toughness for toughness 6 and a 6+ feel no pain as well. Two good things to have, particularly versus damage 1 weapons. Pretty crazy to have strength 5 weapons wounding them on a 5+ as well. Finally, I think the Medic's pretty much the most auto-include durability upgrade for the squad. It allows you to ignore the first failed save for the unit each turn, basically guaranteeing you the value of 1 more Votann in defense, and also potentially regenerate models with D3 of them resurrected for 1 CP, potentially meaning that if you wanted, you could maybe take some saves on the Shield Crest model, tank a couple of wounds that way as well, and then resurrect him when he dies for that durable model to come back once more. Not necessarily the best overall, as he does give you the leadership boost and it might mean that you flee or something, plus I guess you might want the CP for other things. Overall, it gets you a toughness 6, 4+ save, 5+ invul unit with a 6+ feel no pain that ignores the first failed save, plus they have void armor to turn off some rerolls and ignore a pip of AP if they do get shot by AP -1 stuff. Potentially on such a big unit you might be able to get some of them in light cover as well. A 3+ save against ranged attacks certainly wouldn't hurt. Overall, you get a unit that's really quite resilient to most small arms fire. Anything strength 5 or below, wounding them on a 5+ is pretty bad. I guess could still be a bit disturbingly susceptible to blast weapons and things though. Getting mass shots would hurt quite a bit. In theory, per model, you average around about 7 or 8 bolter or bolt rifle hits to slay one 11-point model, or a bit over 2 overcharged plasma hits per model, which isn't too bad by light infantry standards. They do have a transhuman physiology option as well, though that would cost you 2 CP. I feel like a massive brick of these just to slog up to a midfield objective seems okay though. You could justify some slightly shorter range and fancier guns with this amount of defense, maybe the ion blasters for that powerful mortal wound stratagem, or possibly some other fancy hunter gear like those Magna rail rifles. Next up, I don't think we could talk Leagues of Votann combos without talking about the Einhyr Champion. Perhaps just the guy within the Codex that you just look at and know that with a couple of buffs he's really going to break things hard. 100 points for a big punchy guy with a hammer, 4 attacks at strength 10, AP 3 and damage D3+3, and really very solid defense for a character. With the shield crest, he's 6 wounds, a 4+ invul, toughness 5, 2+ save with void armor, -1 damage, and even -1 to wound in combat if you needed it. Pretty good base attack, usually averages 1 or 2 failed saves against a vehicle for something like 5 or 10 wounds on the thing, and he does have quite a fun jumping stratagem to allow him to go into a pretty threatening area of the board, though he can't charge in the same turn. I think quite a few people are being quite tempted by Exactor, the relic mass hammer that converts 6s to hits to D3+3 mortal wounds, and again it's a rule that just combines absolutely amazingly with any source of 4 rerolls to hit, again either a high Carl, the Judgment Token stratagem, or potentially the Cronus Hegemony Warlord trait to make those 6s come up far more regularly. It means that when he rolls those 4 attacks, he will average 6 mortal wounds on the target, so usually at least 1 6, maybe more. Though obviously it's very swingy, you might easily get none, or you might swing high and get 2 or 3. It's going to be pretty mad whenever this guy rolls hot, you get 3 6s after the rerolls, and you suddenly just deal out something like 15 mortal wounds on your luckless foe. Anything that you don't convert also has the chance to flip into normal melee damage as well. So hard targets will certainly have the damage chased down with a couple of other big hits, but the mortal wounds allow him to threaten whole squads of infantry pretty well, and not just really big tanks or monsters. If we're going for a fairly maximised build though, maybe you could field him in Cronus Hegemony for +1 strength and attack, then use the Cronus Warlord trait for reroll hits at an extra attack and +1 to wound against characters and vehicles. Overall that pushes his average mortal wound output to a 7 or 8, usually 1 or 2 of those hits converted, plus another 2 hits on the target. Against most 3+ save vehicles that will be an average of 13 wounds in damage, potentially more with the attack bonus against vehicles. If you're not Cronus though, maybe you could use the more generic Warlord trait of rerolling wound rolls and ignoring damage caps. That'd give him a pretty reasonable chance of converting just about every one of those hits into a wound, and it means that with the damage caps and Exactor, you could easily be threatening Abaddon the Despoiler, potentially killing him in a single round of melee if you luck out and roll 2 6s. Looks like he'd be a fun and incredibly dangerous character to use. Again, the main disadvantage is trying to get him actually into melee though. With only a 5-inch move plus a charge, your opponent would know when he's likely to be able to make it or not. Finally, and in a disturbing combo that I have mentioned already on the channel, let's talk about a Land Fortress castle setup that seems like it can put them in a position to deal some crazy damage to just about anything, while also taking big hits in return. Again, this is a Great Arthurian League one, so extra judgment and rerolls all round. But in this little castle we have 2 land fortresses, each armed with the big rail cannons and bolt cannons and the auto cannon. I think maybe 2's a little bit more practical than 3 to cram in. With their bulk and other units about, they might just not have enough room to maneuver to get lines of sight. Then they're supported by the 2 obvious characters from the Great Arthurian League, Uthar the Destined, the unique High Carl. He can hand out a judgment token to get the railguns getting very scary, but then he's got a pretty scary rule that allows him to change any dice roll to the roll of a 6 once per battle round, and he can use that on the hit roll of the Magna Rail Cannon, change it to an auto 6, that will become an auto 6 to wound with the judgment token, and then that auto 6 to wound will trigger the splash damage of the Magna Rail Cannon, meaning that even if you don't point it at a big heavy vehicle, it means that all the wounds will spill over, potentially killing 10 infantry models dead in a single shot, or 5 Space Marines. They ignore invul saves and have a -4 to wound, so the only way that you're going to avoid taking 10 wounds is to have a big save, say the new Chaos Demons that can't be modified, or high stacking armor of contempts like maybe Terminators in cover, plus perhaps a command point reroll. Otherwise this is pretty much automatic damage against one target, and a massive 10 wounds of it at that. It's pretty crazy to have something quite so general purpose in 40k. With that combo you don't really have any trade-off between making it a big anti-tank gun or a big anti-infantry gun. Then with the damage setup and Uthar about for a fairly scary countercharge threat, you can then add in the Brokhyr Ironmaster. That will give one land fortress a +1 to hit. He gets to repair one for 4 wounds a turn with the Warlord trait. That's potentially around 50 points worth of land fortress restored to the board each time he gets to use that. And on top of that, one of them nearby also gets to ignore 1 failed save per battle round, which again is absolutely massive if you negate something like a d6 damage or d3+3 damage on one of these land fortresses. Again, that could be in the region of another 50 odd points worth of model saved by 1 negated roll. As we mentioned, he can also be quite a good counterpunch unit in himself, hoovering out a whole bunch of mortal wounds with that grav gun, and could potentially even make use of Uther's rerolls to do so. I feel like if you just want to use land fortresses to beat down the enemy with a ton of firepower and defense, then this looks like one of the better setups. So there you have it, 6 ideas for meaty Votann damage and defensive combos. I must admit their damage output is looking truly ludicrous on paper. It will be interesting to see whether or not it'll make up for their relative lack of speed. when it does come to competitive games. I will admit though, I am a bit surprised at just how much easy access Games Workshop gave them to auto wounds, mortal wounds, and full rerolls to hit to trigger both of them. A lot of the damage combos just feel like a different sort of level with many of the other codexes in 40k currently. I'm sure this definitely isn't all that we could talk about. If there's any other big combos that you've spotted within the codex that you think are going to be just as interesting as these, please let me know down in the comments. I could well make a part 2 to this, or cover some fun combos in individual videos if I thought they were worth it. I feel like there's probably something worth talking about with beam weapons, skewering multiple units, and getting lots of mortal wound hits both look potentially interesting. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly be keeping the regular 40k content coming. I do tend to post new videos just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that down in the video description if you're interested. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early each week, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.